Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 good brothers. Ha 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 ha. We have our living Wikipedia and the flamboyant flyer, good brother Flutter. We have making his debut. The man solely responsible for why Mark McKinnon knows who the hell I am. Good brother Nephenor.
Hello, hello, hello. I am the Nephenor.
We have the closest thing to a resident cosplay guy and the only person who can pull off a suit as well as me. Good brother Slick Rick. We have
50 states, and I'm still chasing after that green suited thief.
We have the man making hardcore games for hardcore gamers, good brother Jeremy. And
SuccessorGames.com. Send death is upon us.
And the man of 1,000 contracts, and the man who's probably going to be suing Groundskeeper Willie for gimmick infringement. Good brother JT.
I bought a Switch today.
Hey, congratulations, good sir.
Yay!
Yep. So magic systems. You see him in all forms of fiction, even ones that try to claim that they aren't magic. And some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are somewhere in the middle, and some of them are flying by the seat of their pants. But either way, it is a narrative blank check. And there is one line that has been used in internet culture for a long time that I think is a bit bullshit. You've all heard the line, it's magic, I don't gotta explain it.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
No.
Depends on the type of magic.
I'll take bullshit for 500, Alex.
Yep. Because you are magic in fiction, for all intents and purposes, is a blank check. When you can do just about anything with it, you are inevitably going to deal with the question of why didn't you just use it to solve this problem? I'd say time travel is also guilty of this, but time travel is a fucking minefield.
Mm.
That it very much is.
And there's only a scant handful of stories that have done time travel right, without falling under their weight. And before any of you say Back to the Future, nope, that ain't one of them. And if any of you go, and I know some of you might be tempted to say Doctor Who, to which I say,
Oh, hell. Oh, hell no.
No. And then because I'm here, we won't be talking about Fate because we don't feel like getting bullshit drunk trying to figure out that thing.
The fate magic system is so convoluted. Not even the creator Nasu knows how the hell it works.
And
people have lost their minds trying to figure out the fate magic system.
Almost as much as they have lost their minds trying to figure out a proper timeline with all the reboots in that system and different continuities.
The fate system was actually created, the magic system was created in response to Call of Cthulhu's Sanity.
Well, that explains a lot.
Yeah.
Well, considering that some servants can literally summon Cthulhu, that doesn't surprise me.
Well, there's also the fact that Nasu was a big tabletop gamer.
Yeah.
And he's cited AD&D and Call of Cthulhu, which neither surprises me because Call of Cthulhu, as we've talked about in the past, made quite a footing for itself in Japan. It's actually got a bigger footprint there than D&D does.
I see it referenced more than D&D in like manga and anime.
Japanese love it.
A lot of it has to do with the early days of the replay scene. But that's something we've already covered, and of course the other big one, the other big footprint is Sword World, which I will be doing a video on in the future.
Right.
So are we staying on tabletop, or are we going just Magic?
No, I just wanted to get that out of my system. Getting back on the rails. This week, as you all can see, the topic in question is it's a kind of magic system, because there's a lot of right and wrong ways to handle magic systems in fiction. And I say in fiction because this is meant to be all-encompassing. Because it's me, I know that some people might have the assumption that we'd only be focusing on magic in TTRPGs. Not the case.
There's a reason why Vivi and Lucy are on the screen here, folks.
Because when I was asking Shades to put together the graphic for this, I specifically asked him to bring in a variety of sources, from film to video games to anime to tabletop games and to novels, which is why Kaladin's Stormblast is on the image, because look, I like Brandon Sanderson's work. And now before we even get into the do's and don'ts, I would like to go around, and this might be a difficult question, so if you can't think of one, feel free to pass. But I'd like to get a feel for what people's introduction to not magic in fiction was, but rather the concept of a magic system in a given work. And
Final Fantasy.
Flutter, I'll start with you. Since you mentioned Final Fantasy, I have to say, do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
Which one?
First game.
Mm-hmm.
So the original first game on the NES.
Well, more so the PS1 Origins version.
Okay.
Okay, certainly makes sense.
He ain't old enough for that original NES version.
It's also a mess anyway.
But it introduced us to magic in a lot of ways.
I would say I would dive back into it, but you all know how I feel about the Vancian model. I know some people say it has MP. It's just MP across different levels. No, it has Vancian casting. Don't lie to me. Do not lie to a man who lies for a living.
Don't lie to the monk, because he will get smacked with a giant stick. If he's feeling nice.
If I'm not feeling nice, you'll get smacked with a Tetsubo, which also is a giant stick. Just a giant stick with metal studs in it. No, that's a Kanebo. What am I saying?
On a stick.
Okay, Mr. Jalapeno.
Besides,
Move
at the state fair, everything's on a stick.
Yeah, that is true. Midwesterners will put anything on a stick and fry it.
He's not wrong. The Kansan agrees.
But now, obviously, I'm going last. So, Neff, what about you? What was your first introduction to the idea of a magic system in fiction?
Well, I'm old school, really old school. And I actually first was introduced to magic systems with Redbox D&D.
And I can certainly see it. I'm noticing a bit of a pattern here. What about you, Rick?
I'm literally trying to think back. in terms of magic systems, I would say video games. I can't specifically remember a certain type, the certain game franchise, because I think around the time it was either Fire Emblem, which I don't think really counts to an extent, and then later.
No, it can count. It can count.
Okay, yeah, it was that in the Bravely system.
Jeremy, what about you? Jeremy, what about you?
So I'll first say that Magic is all the things for me. It has been since I was a little kid, and my introduction to it was not a good system, but my introduction to it was The Hobbit. My dad reading The Hobbit to us. Gandalf was my introduction to Magic, and just as a caveat, Tolkien's Magic quote system. There is no system. It's all over the place, inconsistent as hell. Which is one of my things about Magic systems is consistency. The first and then of course everything 1986 from Labyrinth to Goonies to any sort of idea of mystical, magical something going on. Willow, that stuff, and then of course somebody mentioned Final Fantasy. Anything of that, Ultima, those games. Those were more systemic for me, so I started to reason that Magic could be consistent as in something to play or something to imagine, or even when I was imagining it or playing it even with figures, that I could come up with a way that this was going to work consistently all around 1986, I would say.
Actually, I remembered an earlier instance of learning Magic, even though I still don't think it even has one, and I think Flutter's going to get hit as well with this one. And that was Mystic Force.
Yeah, it does have one, but it's not nowhere near as expanded upon as it was in Magi Ranger.
That's fair.
So, and JT, what about you?
Thinking about it, yeah, I'm with you, Jeremy. My mom read me and my sister The Hobbit and the Fellowship of the Ring before, but But I never picked up on the magical system in those books.
There is one.
Yeah, well, and The Hobbit has very little magic.
Right.
If you're actually reading it, there's really no mention of like actual spells being cast or whatever. If anything, it's more melee combat and shit like that. As far as I can think, my first introduction would have to be probably the first RPG I ever played, and that would be Golden Sun on the Game Boy Advance.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it used a very consistent elemental-based magic system: Earth, Fire, Wind, and Water. And you were basically element benders. Avatar benders, who just, who could, throw the elements at and to destroy opponents. And what I loved about the game was that you could use your elemental magic to solve puzzles and affect things in the outside of battle. You could use earth magic. You could use earth they called it synergy. You could use earth synergy to grow vines, so you could climb up walls, or you could use it to lift stones or crush objects. You could use fire magic to put it to melt ice. You could use wind magic to clear paths that were obstructed by trees. You could use water magic to raise or drain water or freeze things, and this was all serving to navigate the dungeons. And so I loved it because typically in RPGs you have all these amazing mystical magical powers that you destroy enemies with, but then like you're traveling around on the map and in the dungeons, and for some reason you can't use any of that for anything else. I'm like, here you are, you're freaking gods, and you can't even get past past a landslide. Are you kidding me? Golden Sun did that. It actually took it answered my question. Why can't I use my godly powers to blast through these puzzles? And Golden Sun said, wait, yes, you can. You just have to but you can only use the ones you've collected so far. So so Golden Sun and Golden Sun: The Lost Age. That was a very consistent, very concise, dare I say, simplistic magic system in place.
Now, for myself, I will note this, and I probably should have said this earlier, but I felt it was a bit self-explanatory. But how I define a magic system in this sense, because I try and be specific with my wording as always, is a defined practice of some sort of supernatural ability that is specifically named and has a similar amount of specificity. English, in its effects and its limitations, as well as having a set of defined, consistent rules.
Mm-hmm.
It's for this reason that the quote unquote magic that's in a lot of Tolkien's work I kind of disqualify.
Yeah.
Since it
doesn't fit any of that criteria.
No. And it didn't start. The closest it came to fitting that criteria was when the concept of subtle magics was brought up in the Coda era of the Lord of the Rings TTRPGs, and that was more of a Stephen Long project, more of a product of Stephen Long than it was of Tolkien. And granted,
I mean, it's alluded to that the elves have some sort of wild magic, unlike the wizards, but it doesn't. It's just so inconsistent.
That leans into God of the Gaps. You have a gap in your knowledge and try and fill it with something.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is, you're actually talking about the differences between the two types of literary magic systems: the hard magic system and the soft magic system.
Yeah. Neither of these are better than the other. It's like trying to argue whether hard SF or soft SF is the better way to go. It ultimately depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell.
Yes.
I will say that you're going to see more soft than hard, because when you're trying to do hard SF, the demands of consistency with physics require you to either be a physicist or have one on hand, because if you're not consistent with your realism, you're going to get eaten alive for it. But in terms of fantasy, you can get away with either. It's just whichever one you pick, you got to commit. For me, my introduction to the concept of a full-on magic system. If I have to use a video game example, it would probably be Grandia, the original Grandia on PS1. And part of the reason I say that is it had that elemental approach, but also the original Grandia had the idea of combining elements, like combining fire and earth to create explosion magic, for instance. If I have to use stuff outside of that, I'd say a lot. I'd in a roundabout way, I'd say early Spawn. The main reason I say that is, so if you read the early issues of Spawn, you may recall that he has a ticking clock when it comes to the use of his powers, and that ticking clock is brought up constantly in the issues.
Yeah. Right.
So even though magic use in comic books in general, and superhero comics specifically, is on the soft end of things, that was the closest. That was a step towards the hard end of things, with the fact that you have this awareness that every time he's using the powers of the suit, that clock is going down.
And not only that, but the specific effects, especially early in the series, the specific effects of the things that he could do with his power and the limitations of it were very spelled out early on and were pretty consistent. It wasn't until later that things get a little wonky.
But by that point, you've built up enough momentum where a little bit of leeway can be given.
Correct. And you have, and here's what another thing I'll say about magic systems that I say are good. I don't know if there's good, bad, right, or wrong magic systems, but I do know that there's magic systems that I like more than others, and this is one of them. When the magic system has world building around it to explain it, it has the fluff gives reason for the magic, and Spawn, of course, there was all the fluff around it, gave it all the reason for him to have the abilities that he had, considering he was a Hellspawn.
Mm-hmm. A Hellspawn with a suit that essentially is a symbiote.
Right.
I mean, it's not like McFarlane invented the symbiote or anything.
No.
No, not at all.
He had been drawing it for quite a while before he got to do it himself.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Although the Spawn character, that's one of his little kid creations, meaning the look and the drawing and the name of the character. It was a little boy. McFarlane drew it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But and I will admit I had it in the back of my mind because I've had a tradition of around Halloween or similar or that time of year, I go back and watch the HBO animated series. Because as much of an asshole as McFarlane can be to his own admission, he was ahead of the curve when it came to that series.
Yeah, despite any personal and or missteps, is what you agree or don't agree with business wise with the guy. He was the anchor of everything. Image. If it wasn't for him, that stuff would have collapsed right from the get go.
I'd say he was the one who was the driving force.
Sure.
The
only one that never went back to work for any in the industry. Only one of them.
Yeah. Liefeld. Well, even McFarlane called him the idiot, and I don't have anything against Liefeld, but his lateness did not do himself any favors.
Mm-mm.
Jim Lee was the sensible of them.
Yeah. And the consummate professional.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say the way he was treated was kind of the final nail, because the story that I remember hearing was that he was going to be going to an event to promote some project for Marvel, and but they wouldn't. They would pay for, but Marvel would pay for his ticket, but not for his wife's.
Mm.
And the reasoning was she wasn't needed for the event, so she could buy her own ticket.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure if that's exactly what was said, but that was kind of the sentiment that they felt they didn't need to pay for his wife's ticket.
I'll take bitch slap for 300, Alex.
but
it's relatable, because this, in the Magic conversation, when it comes to that period of time when Image was launching, that's also when I'm spending a lot of times in comic book stores. I'm spending a lot of times in cards that also have a lot to do with Magic. Dungeons and Dragons is all over the place, and superheroes themselves, especially how Image presented them, was very magical. The things that they were doing, even if it was related to whatever the fluff was around it. The daemons in Wildcats, when it comes to Jim Lee and Voodoo and what she could do, and Void and what she could do, the science fiction elements, even all the way to science fiction like Star Trek. There's all kinds of magic in Star Trek, whether we talk about it directly or not. They just relate it to the alien races and their abilities rather than anything. It's still magic and it's still a system. Vulcans consistently mind meld.
Yeah, and I know a lot of Trekkies would scream to the high heavens about trying to claim that Vulcan abilities are magic, but when you can, but let's not forget that the whole Clark's law goes both ways. Everybody knows any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But the other side of the coin is any sufficiently studied magic is indistinguishable from technology.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own experience, I've always wanted to see more approaches that treat magic and technology as complementary to each other instead of adversarial.
It's funny you say that, because well, as I was mentioning before the show here, I'm actually working on a fiction world, and it's based in modern times with magic, and I do actually have it where the magic can be performed technologically.
Nice.
In fact, there's a whole line of magical programmers that are able to build systems of technology that perform magic.
Yeah, I can.
And we have them married in not science fiction but true science fantasy, like Star Wars, the Force, lightsabers, kyber crystals.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Planet Bound, my game, has a full magic system in a science fantasy setting.
I'd say
called
when
Nova.
it comes to Star Wars, I think the efforts of West End Games are far bigger contributors to nailing down how the Force works and how it can be used, far more than any of the films.
Sure.
Yeah, hell, to some extent, you can even include Yu-Gi-Oh in that. With
of course you can.
With how the cards work with solid vision and how the Millennium items are forged and such.
Yu-Gi-Oh is a summoners. It's summoning magic.
Yes, it is.
It's mostly which you don't see very often.
No, you don't.
No. Yeah, I mean, but
Final Fantasy explored it some,
but the way Yu-Gi-Oh works, at least through 5Gs, it's summoner magic with a little bit of ancient Egyptian laser beam bullshit.
And ancient Incan through the Nazca lines when the Earthbound Immortals are introduced.
And that is correct. That is correct. Those two. So
ancient cultures.
Ancient cultures.
Unknown used ancient power. Nobody knows what it does.
Exactly.
Do we have to go through the whole entire Entei thing again?
No, that's not necessary.
Let's not say we didn't.
Yeah.
But it is funny that you bring up Yu-Gi-Oh, because one of the other things that's not talked about when it comes to talking about magic systems is the presence and importance of magic items.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with Yu-Gi-Oh, the big case of magic items was the Millennium items, which you seem to have a mix. Most of them, with one exception. Actually, I take that back. With two exceptions, are fairly consistent in terms of what they're able to do. The eye is able to see and is able to see just about anything, and that includes minds. The rod is able to control people. The scales is able to judge people, especially in season 0.
Oh yes.
I would not want to mess with Shadi, especially with the whole thing of the feather of Ma'at, which is a thing in Egyptian mythos. Your heart is measured against a feather of Ma'at, and if it's heavier than that feather, then you're gonna get eaten.
Yep.
Which
Yeah.
fits season 0 to a T.
Seasons. We covered this when we did our tribute to Takahashi, but season 0, there is definitely a theme of punishment.
Punishment game.
Oh,
What about the other items?
let's see. But the see, I mentioned the. I mentioned. I'm trying to think. I feel like there's one. I feel like there's one. I feel like there's one I'm missing aside from the two that I have to dedicate to their own spot.
E?
Huh? Oh yeah,
The key?
Oh yeah, the key, which is entering inside someone's mind space, and that's more or less the only thing that it does.
Mm.
Pretty much.
Necklace.
But the two.
Sees the future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clairvoyance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But
Like the only two I'm thinking that you're talking about is are basically the two we have near the end of it.
Puzzle and the ring.
yeah, those are the ones where what exactly they do are all over the place.
It's just plot. It's just plot convenience. It's whatever the hell works. But maybe that's on purpose because it shows, because that's ultimately the final showdown between the wielder of the puzzle and the wielder of the key. Because they are the two final opponents because their power set is so vast and ranged. Compared to the, you have to have.
I would say the connect. If I had to hazard a guess, the puzzle and the ring were designed first.
They were, especially considering the fact that through Dark Side of Dimensions, we see how.
No, I don't mean in a in-universe sense.
Oh, right. Like the concepts were in a conceptual sense. Okay, that makes that makes more sense. Yeah.
And afterwards, the idea started to take shape because the connective tissue between those two is them housing a spirit with unfinished business.
Brian, that is not what the puzzle does. It's just that that's intrinsically linked because the wearer of the puzzle is extremely skilled.
He's obviously talking to the chat, folks.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I see it. Pork chop. Careful, you have a Kansas City in here. Don't make me grill you.
Exactly. Anyway, moving on. Anyway, back on top. Finish your thought, Mark.
But on one hand, you have the puzzle housing the spirit of Atem, and on the other hand, you have the ring housing the spirit of Bakura, the King of Thieves,
and by extension, Zork Necrophates.
Mm-hmm. Who?
yeah, I guess so.
And then we have the movie exclusive.
Oh yeah,
Pyramid of Light.
Yeah, the Pyramid of Light.
Don't count. Non-canon.
Doesn't count. It doesn't count. Never brought up in the anime proper.
Oh God.
But you gotta admit,
they're challenging me. They're tempting me.
But you gotta love the Pyramid of Light. You gotta love the Pyramid of Light movie just because it has Kaiba building a machine to cross over to the afterlife just so he can challenge his rival to a fucking card game.
That's not Pyramid of Light. That's Dark Side of Dimensions.
Okay, my mistake. Well, you gotta love that movie because it's fucking Kaiba is so fucking obsessed with winning that he literally builds a machine to go to the afterlife.
Yeah.
This is what he does with all of his billions. It's money. So he can beat a guy in a card game from beyond the grave.
Exactly. Anyway, moving on.
Fuck, I love Kaiba. I fucking love Kaiba. God damn it.
This is everybody gives Bruce Wayne shit about how he should be spending his millions, but nobody talks about Kaiba at all in the same manner.
No, they don't.
Dragon Jet.
We could go on about
Otherwise, White Jet.
Yeah.
We could spend all day about Kaiba, but let's get back on the ring.
Yeah.
That's a video in and of itself.
Now, one thing I will note when it comes to Magic systems, obviously, stuff like video games, and tabletop games are going to have an advantage because you need to have rules, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever it comes to fiction, having rules for your system, for your Magic system, can certainly not hurt, especially since, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the use of magic is a blank check.
Mm-hmm.
One that, if you leave it unchecked, you could do everything with. If you leave it unchecked, you can end that being able to do anything with it can undermine the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, that it can.
Just because I feel like picking on MCU Phase 4, let's consider this when it comes to introducing stuff without thinking it through. So
yeah,
time for me to pick on Eternals again.
Oh yes.
So
get out your popcorn, everybody.
You have this group of super beings that have supposedly lived among humanity for thousands of years. So here's the elephant in the room. If their job is to act as caretakers for the Earth for the eventual birth of some super being, where the hell were they during the Infinity War?
Yeah. Why is it? Where the fuck were they throughout the entirety of the Infinity Saga? Why is it taking us till the Multiverse Saga to find out about what they've been up to?
They didn't think of that far ahead. I don't think they thought that far ahead.
No, especially
they had time built up after 1,000 years.
Yeah, especially considering the fact that they tapped a director that had more experience working on documentaries to handle a feature film. And yes, that is actually the case. Monk can vouch for me on this.
Oh,
yeah.
Lord.
I don't even need to vouch. You can. It's pretty obvious with the way that film was shot.
Yeah.
But of course, when it comes to the use of magic, this whole breaking the rules is something that something that I see a whole lot more often in soft magic systems.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times when soft magic systems are written, it's usually written with a very laissez-faire attitude.
They are.
In some cases, you have folk who treat it as a we'll explain it later, also known as the mystery box problem, which we've covered in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also have the problem of introducing stuff and then not following through on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the concept of a soft magic system is only able to work when you have a world that is not fully explored, or
Right.
one where there is a heavy emphasis on myth. I think that's the reason why the soft magic you see in, say, Tolkien's work isn't going to bug people as much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because even if
It's not the primary focus.
Yeah.
So,
No, it isn't.
meaning none of the plot hinges on it.
Yeah. Hell, subject change, but this is also relevant. You could even attribute God of War to having the God of War series or having a magic system with its magic abilities that you acquire throughout the games.
I would say now I do have, when it comes to God of War, I have to put a bit of a wall in when it comes to this. On one hand, everything everything canonically before, but everything from the original all the way up to 3, and on the
Yes.
other end, the Dad of Boy era.
Mm-hmm.
And
Or-
the way that the use of magic in that one in the earlier game in the PS2 and PS3 era was very much in the tradition of a divine boon that you see a lot in Greek myth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all the stuff you were getting was either from the gods or from the Titans,
Right.
or in some case a mix, like with 3.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was either an item or a spell, and that spell was essentially just channeling a bit of that god's domain.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most unconventional magic systems that I have loved so much, if you could even call it a magic system, is the Sykes from The World Ends With You.
Ooh,
That
nice
is
choice.
so unconventional. You still have you can still throw fire and thunder and ice, but you can do so. But it's all supposedly coming from psychic manipulation. So there's so many other There's so much other stuff you can do with it. I had to bring it up because it's just Twewy and Neo Twewy. It's just such an unconventional system. It's fantastic.
And even with the amount of stuff that you can do with that, especially through the pins, it still resonates with the theme of self-expression that is all over the place in not just The World Ends With You, but I'd say in a large part just the culture of Shibuya in general.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that is the theme of self-expression, of customization, of literally wielding your own style.
Mm-hmm.
Weaponizing your own sense of fashion and flair. It totally. See, this is why I love Twewy so much, because the gameplay syncs up so well with the themes of the story and shit. It's just so good.
And speaking of unique, since Brian brought it up, let me talk about the absolute madman that is the magic systems in Brandon Sanderson's work.
oh boy.
The bigger of the two is Mistborn that I'd like to cover, because the magic systems that are present in the Stormlight Archive are a different beast entirely. But with Mistborn, all of the magic is, instead of being based on the traditional elements, it's based on different types of metals. Whether you're using allomancy, whether you're using ferromancy, whether you're using hemomancy, it's all based on using metals. And it's a natural transition, because there are certain types of metals that we consume just through our daily life, and this is just taking it to another step.
Right.
Fortunately, Sanderson has given us a handy little chart on the matter, which I am trying to see if I can find the chart in a proper size, because the one that I found was not cutting it. But here just as an example, and I'm going to be posting this in the council for you all. There is the table of of ferrochemical metals.
Okay.
This is
Alright.
what is this? Is this alchemy by any chance? Classical alchemy?
No. You're
Oh,
us-
not at all.
You are use.
Roots.
You are using. You are. You're using metals in different forms, and the more common one I'd go with is the metals used in allomancy. It's as you can see from both of the images, it's the same set of metals, just with different symbols and with different effects. On each side, you can see
Right.
the effects of each. The idea with allomancy, the idea is you're consuming a metal and then burning it to do these effects.
Ah.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
And hemomancy is a bit of a separate case, but but no matter which form you're using, it's still being based on these lists of metals. That's also why I can't make the comparison to alchemy.
And hold on, thanks to Brian, there's also a table for allomantic metals, which I'll also
I
post.
just posted it.
Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, that was the second one you posted. All right. My mistake. Yes, yeah, we saw those. I saw that, Brian.
Yeah, and hemomancy is the odd case out, but hemomancy is the one you don't want to mess with.
No, because that involves blood.
It also involves driving in some cases driving nails into things.
Ugh. Yeah, fuck that.
But
Nope, that's not me. I'll pass. I'll stick over here with the stuff from the Shin Megami Tensei.
and of course, when it comes to the and yeah, he's right when he says sort of. When it comes to the magic that was used in the Stormlight archive books, it does also have its own chart, which I will also put in council. But the idea is Stormlight is an energy that is, and I'm vastly simplifying this, that is
nice.
that is generated through the high storms that pass through the setting, kind of with a consistency almost like the path that hurricanes pass through. Like they always start off across the Atlantic and then make landfall every single time.
Yeah.
And each of the and of course what you're looking at is the way Stormlight is used for the group known as the Knights Radiant. It's a form of magic called investiture. But each group within Stormlight, within the Knights Radiant, have different, essentially two different elements that they utilize, but utilizing them in different ways. There's also the fact that each order has certain ideals that they have to speak. Kind of
Right.
like the knight's kind of like a knight's oath with actual consequences. That again this the thing I would say that a lot of the magic systems that are within the unified setting that Sanderson has are a bit of a rabbit hole. But unlike, say, Fate, it's a rabbit hole that has a bit more of a purpose.
Right.
And super consistent. And speaking of Sanderson, him finishing one of my favorite magic systems in novelization ever, which was the One Power in the Wheel of Time, and using weaves and combining elements along with spirit. Again, super consistent and super consistent with the fluff. I mean, it makes sense in the world that you've created. So that's the key to the whole thing. If you were making sense in the world that you've created, then you're winning, and you can make hard magic systems like these.
Yeah.
The One Power and these two that you just hard magic systems because it's consistent with your fluff.
And since Kaladin is shown here, I'll use him as an example, and bring up the Windrunners. The elements or surges that the Windrunners have access to is adhesion and gravitation. Adhesion creates bonds, essentially sticking things together. Whereas gravitation, you would think control of gravity, but it's more of controlling where down is. But people who know what they're doing with gravitation can achieve a form of quasi-flight. Since you're essentially controlling where down is. Which is why you're gonna see a lot of imagery of a Windrunner, well, flying. And when it but this it's for this. Admittedly, I think Sanderson at one point had stated that one of his big inspirations when he was starting up was Magic the Gathering, which even with all the craziness that's happened with it, the colors of Magic in that system are consistent with the themings. You could even say that each color is its own kind of class, which may have been the intent.
More than likely.
Because I do know that Richard Garfield had said that he wanted a deck of cards in Magic the Gathering to be akin to a character sheet in D&D. To which I would say in some regards he may have outdone the whole character sheet idea, because you don't have martial characters as one-trick ponies in something like Magic. Sorry, that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine when it comes to martial characters in general, because of how often we've seen that problem. And speaking of that, this is as good. I know I've talked about it quite a bit, but since we're talking about Magic systems, this is as good a time as any to express why I have so much issue with the Magic system in the more ubiquitous games.
I'm back.
Well, welcome back. Welcome back,
JT.
Hello.
Let's consider for a moment the Vancian model as is presented in D&D and its derivatives.
Right.
The reason it's called the Vancian model is because of the fact that it was drawing upon the works of Jack Vance, in particular the Dying Earth books. Now, I have gone through the Dying Earth books in the past, and the way Magic worked in that approach could be described as a very complex form of mathematics in a sword and sorcery setting.
Right.
This is where I have a problem with D&D's approach with it, because a lot of the default settings you could see in something like D&D, whether it be Blackmoor, whether it be Mystara, whether it be Birthright, or even Forgotten Realms, both iterations of it.
Mhm.
They are strictly in the realm of high fantasy. The rare
that they are.
exception is, I know some people will bring up Dark Sun. Dark Sun is the exception. And even with that, using traditional magic in Dark Sun is not advisable.
No.
Unless you want to get yourself in a shitload of trouble.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you're using psionics, nobody's got a problem with that.
Oh, not at all.
But you have a setting that works best when magic is poorly understood, and you're putting it in a world where that is not the case. That's where one of the big problems lie for me.
I'll hopefully be back, guys. Being called elsewhere.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'm waiting on. I gotta get ready.
All right. No worries.
See you later, guys.
Later, dude.
Take care.
Have a good one.
But Neff, I think you see where I'm going with this whole thing of the magic has to match the tone or even subgenre of the setting that it's in.
Yep, exactly.
I know some people hated it, but did any of you ever see the film Bright?
Yes, in fact, a lot of I was rather amused because the stuff that I'm creating for my world is very similar in a lot of ways to that movie. And I started working on it about a year and a half before that movie even came out.
Now,
hey.
The guy behind it has his own issues and has been run out of town for being a fucking idiot. Much like Josh Trent. But what I appreciate with something like Bright is the fact that for all intents and purposes, having some sort of magic item is treated like having a nuke.
Yep, and I agree with that. I actually love that theory.
And even if all that it is just a wand that most people aren't going to fully understand how it's used,
or can use in this case.
Mm-hmm. But just the fact that that it could be used, I remember somebody asking, why don't they just destroy the thing? That might actually be worse, because all that energy's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, actually, have you ever read the book The North Valley Grimoire?
I have not.
Highly recommend it. It's a modern setting where something happened that caused magic, a rift to open into our world, and now magic is spreading throughout our world, and people are learning it.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say, it's definitely one of the most intriguing takes on magic I've seen.
Cool.
Now, of course, a lot of the approaches we've taken when it comes to magic are very Western in concept. I'd like to shift gears a bit and cover ones that are more Eastern in their approach. And of course, I'm using this as a segue to bring up Avatar, which even though some people will argue otherwise, the original series, not Legend of Korra or anything that comes after it, is through and through a wuxia series.
Mm-hmm.
Hey.
It is even going through a lot of the beats that a wuxia story will go through, which are similar and not to the hero's journey. It's complicated.
Not only that, it's got a magic system which is on the hard side.
Mm-hmm.
I would say bending is kind of a midway approach.
Yeah, it's middle, but it is hard leaning.
60-40. I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'd give it a little more than that, only because of the tie-in to the fluff being so consistent, and then the abilities within each of the bending being fairly consistent.
It also makes
that's pretty hard.
It also makes it complete hell to try and adapt Avatar into tabletop, and plenty of people have
You're
tried.
not kidding.
Yeah.
We've talked about the official approach and why that sucked.
Yeah.
and why anybody who wants to adapt it is better off using any of the many fan projects that have done it. But it is much like how The World Ends With You is heavily leaning towards self-expression. A lot of the ways that bending works are in that self-expression, even when there's full-on categories. Although admittedly, some of them are, I'd say some forms of bending are more flexible than others. The one that's the least flexible, oddly enough, is firebending. At least in the way it's presented.
Water bending is pretty close second, if not first for me.
I mean, with
you have consideration of volume there. Even earthbending does too, but the consideration of volume alone mechanically is so complex when it comes to water bending.
Well, the reason I put firebending as far as the one that's the least flexible is is of the ones that we see, it has the least subtypes in terms of its applications.
It's pretty much one type of use, and that's it.
Two at most. Fire and lightning.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's right. The lightning.
I don't count the lightning redirect because that was just a technique that was inspired by observing water bending. And all that is just manipulating the environment in a different sense. But you're still manipulating lightning, just not making it yourself. And I know some people would bring up the blue fire that Azula had. Apparently, according to what I read in the art book, the reason they went with that blue fire was to make hers not look like everybody else's and to make her distinct. But I'd say where the actual flexibility comes in is more in the origin of where the bending comes from rather than the effect itself when it comes to firebending. That was made especially clear when it came to the encounter with the Sun Warriors. Who tell me you're Aztec without telling me you're Aztec. especially with the dragon with seven colors, which totally isn't cribbing notes from Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah, but okay.
Where's Coatl? Sorry, I'm thinking how to train or Kobayashi.
Kobayashi's Dragon Man, yeah.
Yes. Sorry, thinking the wrong Quetzal. Never mind.
So I do think that there's something to be said of, okay, so firebending is a thing, but different peoples, groups, tribes, folk, whatever, they have their own belief system around said thing, and so their whole approach or philosophy or application of it is going to be entirely different. So it may appear, they're doing something different, or the origin is confusing now. Well, no, it's just their belief system.
And this is actually a very common thing in a lot of wuxia in particular, and just a lot of Eastern fiction in general. I know that nobody is bringing up the flavor of generating energy. In reality, what bending is a form of ki. Whether you
Sure.
pronounce it with a Q or a C, the end result is the same. I've even argued
He-
that the Force in depending on how you write it, the Force in Star Wars
Sure.
is key. Although, and I know I'm going to catch heat for this. I actually think the concept of Force sensitivity undermines it, or the idea that that you are born with some sensitivity.
Yes, because key just is.
Everybody the
Correct.
idea with key use is everybody and everything has it in some form or another.
Yes.
But those who dedicate themselves to the study of it are able to achieve a certain level of understanding with it and manipulate it. And if you go back and watch the original trilogy, especially with the way Obi-Wan presents himself, that's
Mhm.
you kind of have that
Correct.
appearance. I know it's easy to pick on the prequels with the whole midi-chlorian thing, but and that's certainly a factor, but I think you could still do the whole higher level of understanding even with that, much in the same way that some people are going to be more inclined towards certain types of physical activities, just through natural abilities. I think that was the intent, but by having it that you have to be force sensitive in order to do that training, what you end up having a have not situation.
Yep. Which is good for purpose of story if the creators, meaning the guys who are coming up with Star Wars, so let's pretend that they knew that it functioned like key as was described originally in the original Star Wars in Episode 4, and then we're playing with a plot line called force sensitivity because some people seem to be naturally able to do this. Yes, then we can play with it as a plot line. But unless this was a problem with the Force from the get-go. George did not know what the Force was in its ultimate form, period. And so it was a make it up as you go from the get-go. It was just an idea around things like wushu and other things that he liked at the time. So he just threw it out there, and then he made it up as he went along. There was no underlying thing like that could be that, okay, this exists in all things and everywhere. That's what I'm saying in these first three movies, and so therefore it can function like that. And maybe it seems like people are more force sensitive because of just whatever natural ability they have, but it does exist in all things, and anybody therefore could learn as a potential way of expressing it later. But he didn't know anything from the get-go. That's the problem with so many of. We're talking about magic systems. That's a problem overall because people are not so grounded in their worlds that they've created that they're not able to answer the questions when they come up.
I would say this is a consequence of not having a series Bible in a work.
There you go. That's a good way of putting it.
We've talked about it. I've talked about it plenty of times. I know it gets repetitive to bring up the whole concept of a series Bible, but I'll stop bringing it up when it stops applying.
Yeah.
This and also I'll stop bringing it up when television writing stops using it. This idea of this unified document that is meant to keep everything consistent is the concept of the series Bible, and I've mentioned this before, but it's not I'd like to say I came up with it, but I didn't. It's been a thing in television for decades.
Yeah, for a long time. I mean, it's been for true world builders who have been as consistent as you can see in stories that have been built for a long time. You know that they had one. I have an extensive one for Planet Bound. If you don't have one, you're doing yourself a disservice and your product.
And nobody does bring up the point that a lot of people have the idea of a cool idea of wouldn't it be cool if, and then don't think about the consequences. I'd say that's a problem that a lot of writers and a lot of creatives just have an issue of tunnel vision when it comes to that. It's very much a case where you do need to think about it, because if you're going to get anybody invested in your world, then you actually have to have one, not a collection of ideas, but an actual world. Um, and have that world be your world has to be as much of a character as your characters, I guess is the best way to put it.
Mm,
Um,
that's a great way to put it. I think when it comes to, hey, it would be a good idea if, yes, tunnel vision, and there is this just, the childlike experience of a cool idea is the childlike experience of a cool idea. We all experienced that as a kid. We now experience it as adults when it comes to things like that. I mean, when we started putting 80s stuff out all over again, and before Transformers came out, and they were putting out other things. Wouldn't it be cool if they did Transformers now? Wouldn't it be cool if they did Dino Riders? Wouldn't it be cool if and nobody thinks it through. It's just a cool idea, because the feeling of a cool idea is the feeling of a cool idea, and we're running off feelings more and more these days.
And the thing is that when you run off those sort of feelings, unfortunately they won't stick.
They can't. Feelings are fleeting.
Mm-hmm. Fashion is fleeting, style is forever.
Another great
is the quote that I often use on these kind of things. And I will admit that when it comes to magic systems in tabletop, if somebody asks me which ones I actually prefer, one of the big ones, and I think this was a bit of pandering on Shade's part in bringing this up, is Shugenja in Legend of the Five Rings.
I'm not familiar.
Not familiar.
Shugenja,
Yeah, haven't read that one.
L5R is a TTRPG that has been near and dear to me for many years. I'm more familiar with the RPG than I am with the card game, even though the card game came first. It's the thing about Shugenja is they have far more in common with I would say druids than they do with wizards in the traditional sense. They have and L5R obviously is heavily inspired by Japanese culture, and was kind of born out of the fact that its creators watched way too many Kurosawa movies, and have made that clear plenty of times. They are not interested in doing a historically accurate feudal Japan, which people end up bringing that argument a lot towards it. But rather, this isn't Japan that it's portraying, it's Rokugan. There's some elements there, but it's its own thing. Shugenja do not cast spells directly. They entreat elemental spirits to perform a favor for them, which is why I compare them with druids. Stylistically, they have more in common with a Taoist priest or a Japanese onmyunji than they do the traditional wizard in his tower kind of thing. And even with that, there are certain rules that apply to. The reason why they have a limited number of spells is a limited number of times they can speak to spirits freely in that sense. And for the most part, all of the favors that they could get are based on the five elements. But there's going to be an element that they are better at, and one that they're worse at. Well, except for Phoenix Shugenja, who are the only ones who have access to void magic and are the Joker in this. But again, they're not directly using magic; they're speaking to, they're they're having other people do the effects.
So is there something about it mechanically, meaning in the mechanics of the game, that makes it superior for you? Or is it just the fluff?
It's a mix of both. The other thing is the fact that it's not fire and forget. Much like anything else in L5R, you do have to roll for the effect, and rolling for that effect is a gamble.
Nice.
There are a handful of. It's for that reason that there is technically a few spells that could be considered fireball, but not as many as you might think. And the problem, a big reason why I have issues with the whole fire and forget concept is I don't like the idea of spells or any kind of effect, just as a designer, automatically hitting. Or the whole thing of it hits now somebody has to do now the person being hit has to try and do this defensive mechanic. I know that the whole concept of saves is an artifact of the wargaming scene, but that's not enough of a reason to keep it around.
No, definitely not.
I would, especially since it's the only non-static defense. Like if you're doing physical attacks, you're up against a specific number. But when doing spells, it's up to that whole save thing.
Well, that's my issue with most since we're on the RPG topic. My issue with almost every Magic system that exists in tabletop role-playing games is that it is separate from the entire rest of the system and functions entirely different from the rest of the system. And because game creators have unfortunately never found a way to incorporate it into the rest of their system. They just can't wrap their heads around it, or I don't even know what the issue is ultimately. But no one's ever truly done that I've seen.
I have seen people take approaches to amend this. I would say the problem is a reliance on tradition, for tradition's sake.
Yeah, for tradition's sake. Thank you.
This is the reason why one of the phrases we have around here is designed by gospel. You're doing that when you're not doing an idea because it's a good idea that fits with what you're trying to do, but because you feel you are expected to.
Right. I have to have magic points of some kind. I have to. Okay, got it.
Mm-hmm. The sole reason that Zan and I are using magic points, even if we're using it in a different manner, is because we're trying to emulate a certain series that uses it.
Exactly. That's a completely different animal.
I do recall at one point I was for a different project. I designed a magic system that was built around Catalyst, where you yourself did not have MP. Your Catalyst did. It was basically a battery, and better quality Catalysts would be able to do more stuff. And yeah, the amount of spells that you could cast were based on you yourself, but it was more about how effective you're able to use a resource. Slayer's D20 didn't have MP. It had you can cast until you but every time you cast you're going to get tired.
Mm-hmm.
But
got it.
I would say an easy way to get about it is by having magic be treated as just another type of skill.
Thank you. Very good. And that is the ultimate, or in the case of Planet Bound, that magic, quote unquote, Nova, is an attribute. and functions like all the rest of the attributes, and therefore skills are skills based on the attribute.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's actually kind of the way that Wheel of Time does it. And as you mentioned, as they cast the spells, they get tired. It wears them out. And
Right.
it even has the possibility of, if you do too much, well beyond what you're supposed to be capable of,
Burn you out.
Exactly. You can burn yourself right out.
Yeah, and I know some people might bring up the concept of spell backlash in, say, Shadowrun, or spell drain. That's another coat of paint of the whole casting spells can have physical consequences. There is one video game that I can think of whose magic system I would love to utilize in a tabletop sense. Are any of you familiar with the game Galarians and its sequel, Galarians Ash?
Uh-uh.
No, I am not.
This was an interesting beast, and technically
What
speaking,
system was it on, Monk?
Galarians was on PS1, Galarians Ash was on PS2.
Okay.
I would say it's kind of straddles the line between action and survival horror, with Ash feeling far more of a action game with some elements of survival horror. But now, technically speaking, the magic, quote unquote, in that is psychic powers, but it's psychic powers that are generated through the use of PPECs, or psionic power enhancement chemicals. You injecting that basically gives you the equivalent of ammo for that psychic effect. But each time you use it, you do drain that ammo, but you also generate what's known as TP, or threshold points. This, unless you treat it through a drug called Delmator, which resets it. This will gradually increase with each casting until it caps out. When it does, you enter a state called short, where and short does a lot of damage to everything around you, but it also drains your health pretty rapidly. And just that idea of being on that threshold, because the idea of short is that your mind is short-circuiting.
Right. I like it.
And granted, in the original Galarians, there were only 3 magic effects. They added 2 more in Ash, but that's kind of the principle it worked around. When it comes to the games that utilize the more ubiquitous or more litigious systems, the answer that I always bring up with this kind of thing is spheres of power, largely because instead of having set rules on how magic works, the rules of magic are dictated by the magic tradition system that it has. That is purpose built by either the player or the GM in that case. If you want to do the more traditional casters in using the sphere system, you can. But if you want to do crazier stuff, that's also a option. Especially since everything revolves around talents instead of a defined list, which I'd say that's another thing that I think people should consider. Unless you're building around it, I don't see the point in having a defined spell list.
Thank you.
You can kind of get away with it in. I don't have a problem with a defined spell list in say Dying Earth, for reasons I already mentioned, or even something like Harry Potter, because of the focus of the school and just scholastic methods. Like how we all got yelled at for not having the exact precise method when solving a math problem. Sorry, was that too specific?
No, totally not something that I've experienced multiple times.
We all had that one teacher who would get on you if you didn't show the entire order of operations for that problem instead of just solving the problem. And I certainly know I did, and that teacher really hated me because I would always push back.
Mine hated me because I'd always prove him wrong.
I was keep in mind I'm the same person who would get on English teachers whenever they'd have typos in their assignments. Because I can be a bit of a dick. But within that, people are being taught specific. Go ahead.
Spell list. That's again, it's okay because when the examples that you gave, it's consistent with the fluff.
Mm-hmm. But let's consider the difference between the big three I'd say three arcane casters: wizards, warlocks, sorcerers. Warlocks get their magic through pacts, through deals with the devil, even if it's not always a demon. Sorcerers get it through inborn talents. Sometimes more often than not through some sort of bloodline or ancient ancestry. Wizards through study. I know Brian is bringing up bards. Bards lean more into divine casting, depending on
like clerics
with, and with the exception of the edition everyone hates but me. The actual magic from bards was never clearly defined. I more define it from inferring its inspirations than anything else. But with those three, two of them, the question is why are they using a defined spell list when they really should be? Okay, with Warlock you could kind of argue a spell list since it's being given to them by another entity. Sorcerer though, that's the one I'm not bending on. Why are they using
not
a
at
spell
all.
list when they should be freeforming it like a chef who is able to make really good dishes but has absolutely no recipe because he's winging everything.
Honestly, they should be forced into a kind of wild magic every single time.
Right, but the problem is the crunch associated with them it doesn't jive. There's no way to do that within those systems.
This is the reason why when it comes to that sort of caster, I'm always in favor of effect based. And I know some might bring up Warhammer, but I'll get to that in a minute. As far as bards, the interpretation that I've always gone with anytime bards are utilized is their magic comes from the power of story. Because and I use that phrasing specifically to divorce this necessity of a musical instrument. The only reason bards have a musical instrument is because one of the inspirations is the Pied Piper of Hamelin.
Which ironically is also a source of inspiration for Slenderman.
Mm-hmm. And nobody brings up the idea of a spell was to create an imperfect solution that you need to use your creativity. I find that to be a bandage, and I find that to be a bit of a stretch personally, because in creating a spell list, you're bottlenecking things.
Yes.
And if it's about finding your creativity, that would be much better solved with a build your own effect kind of system. Since there you have a baseline to build around. That's also why I don't care for this idea of spells having to be this defined effect all the time, because when you look at Magic traditions, that's hardly the case. But when it comes to bards, the stories that they are aware of, they are channeling through and having that manifest through their effects. So
yeah, I could definitely see that as a divine kind of magic. It makes sense.
It's just divine in the sense of collective conscience rather than an actual deity. But the big reason that like I said, I think it's important to divorce the idea of needing a musical instrument in order to be a bard. Because one of my favorite bard representations, oddly enough, comes from Dragon Age 2. That being Varric. Even if he's not called as such, Varric is very much a bard. But you'll never see him have a musical instrument. But he is somebody who spins stories, and how true his stories are is debatable. And let's not forget that even things like jesters can be interpreted as bards, and while they may use musical instruments, their big role in a lot of stories is being a shit to nobility.
Beavers. The jester only pretends to be a fool.
Mm-hmm. And it's for that reason that I do think that if you're gonna have this whole mindset of using your creativity, give people a structure where they can use it. A spell list is not that kind of structure. Now, when it comes to magic items, one thing I'm curious about is do you guys feel that magic items should be? Would you lean more towards them being used as catalysts for spells, or that the magic item has a single associated magic effect? Essentially the catalyst or tool debate.
You can go with either, actually, depending on the item.
Correct.
I mean, for some of the things I've been thinking of is magical items as batteries. They are just there to specifically give charge to whatever effect you're trying to do.
Hence why wizards always have staffs of some kind.
Exactly.
Which, that's another thing that a lot of people don't think about, is why, or at least the answer boils down to tradition of why a wizard has to have a staff or a wand, or an orb in some cases. Yes, yes. Go ahead and make your pondering the orb jokes. I know some of you got them.
I've already pondered them.
So yeah, a focal point is great, but also something very specific. Again, one of my favorite systems, novel form, was Wheel of Time and the One Power, and the use of Tir Angreal having specific purposes. You're using magic through it to do using the One Power through it to do something extraordinary, but something very specific, as opposed to a Say Angreal or Angreal, which is just enhancing it like a focal point. both work. It has to. The consistency with the fluff is the crunch has to go with the fluff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Wheel of Time had some of the best dealings with magic and the best system built on it.
And I don't know when this started, but there seemed to be this idea of you need to have crunch and fluff be divorced from each other. I don't know where this started, but I
I
find it
don't
to be
know
completely
either, but it's
wrong.
awful. Yeah, it's
Yeah, that's
wrong.
a horrible idea.
And it's not only horrible. It just cut. Yeah, it's horrible in that the players are the ones who are just dealing with the chaos. When you've divorced them, all you have is chaos.
For me, the big problem I have with this particular mindset is it seems to mostly come from people who hyper focus on the idea of games as a storytelling device and forget the game part. Because with a lot of the game stuff that we've talked about is the magic system or its equivalent either has an in-universe reason for the way it works, how it does, or is tying back to the themes of that game's story. And yes, I'm using that as a segue to bring up The World Ends With You again, because that does both. Just so I'm not focusing on just tabletop with this. But and it doesn't have to be a full-on system. Let's consider the fact that pyromancy and fire are such a big deal in the original Dark Souls. Well, in that regard, you can describe the Estus flask, which is going to be your lifesaver no matter how good you are, as liquid fire. It's so much of the theming within Dark Souls is around fire and its effects. I mean, the discovery of the first flame basically kickstarted the human civilization as we know it in that setting. And when it comes to, I'd say one other thing I'd be curious about is we see it a lot in console style RPGs, but let's talk a bit about the concept of magitech, i.e., magic through technology. I've always wondered, and maybe you guys have your own takes, why the concept of not doing magic versus technology is so alien to so many.
I'm thinking a lot of this came from various cyberpunk games, actually. It's like Shadowrun, where the whole concept of the magic or the technology inhibits your humanity, and that they see that as a way of stopping the magic.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, they feel that the two, if you don't have connection to your humanity, you can't cast the magic, so the technology inhibits that.
I'd go one step further. I think it's an issue of, once again, an issue of tradition. This time,
Yep.
a lot of stories that have this conflict between tradition and progress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
And even Lord of the Rings had this to
Oh,
a
yeah.
different extent with the ending of the
Industrialization.
Age of
Yeah,
Myth.
the whole orcs doing things in an industrial scale rather than individual.
Well, that, and also the shifting between an Age of Myth to the Age of Man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although the whole elves need to retreat to the west, I always found a bit silly. Like all of a sudden you want to drop everything and go across the ocean.
No progress for them. Yeah, we definitely have. It's definitely a long time story. Technology versus magic, or science versus magic. There has been great stories that have married them or have tried to. There's people who have tried to, and I don't know. Palladium, of course, riffs and techno wizardry. I don't know if it's successful or not, but it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Yeah, or heck, there's you can look at also Mage the Ascension, which had the Technomancers completely.
Yeah. Somebody, I don't know if he's still on, but the guy who is coming up with his magic system right now for his story said he was full blown combining technology and magic.
Yeah, quite literally. To give you a basic of how it works is magic requires a path to create the spell. So, the whole concept of circles and stuff like that, that's where that comes from. And it requires energy to go into it. And since circuits can be pathways, you can define the magic through the circuit pathways.
Mm-hmm.
And so magic is now just a form of technology.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In Planetbound, there's Lodestar who use Nova specifically telemechanically, and that's all they do.
There's an anime series based on a light novel called I actually watched this. I couldn't become a hero, so I reluctantly got a job. And it's basically a fantasy world where the Demon King has been slain, and all the heroes are out of business. So they have to settle for normal 9-to-5 jobs. And what the world did was it took all of the magic in the fantasy world, and instead of using it for combat and spells, they used it instead of electricity. And they created technology that uses magic instead of electricity as a power source.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. I can certainly see that working. And oddly enough, I'd say it's, and I think I know why this is the case, but the whole thing of magic and technology meeting, we see a lot more frequently in console-style RPGs. I know some of you are going to be thinking, don't you mean JRPGs? I fucking hate that phrase. I've made it very clear why. But through the NES and SNES era of Final Fantasy and beyond that, contrary to popular belief, there's never been a straight high fantasy entry in the Final Fantasy series. It's always straddled the line with other genres.
Yep.
Even the first one.
Yep. Sure did.
First one had airships. So anyone who wants to argue,
well, Tiamat's whole tower was a bunch of robots.
Mm-hmm. There's the Trails of series has also been brought up in the chat, and you have I would actually to an extent include Golden Sun because of how synergy and the whole thing with the Jin is, well, rather, the Jin is a special case, but synergy is something that you can learn just through studying. And nobody is saying the most high fantasy setting was 12. No, 12 had airships out the ass, and plenty of steampunk elements. Plus, I'd say 12 had a lot of Fertile Crescent vibes, especially with the whole thing with the desert. But I would say the reason why you don't see this magic versus technology thing as much in console style RPGs is a bit of a is a bit of a cultural thing. So let's consider the faith scene in Japan. Obviously the big element is Shintoism, but modern day Shintoism has elements of Zen Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism woven into it because of the integrations over the centuries. And you see, if you look at a lot of stuff in Japanese pop culture, you see that kind of mix. Even nowadays, there isn't this East versus West line when it comes to creatives, because, to use a recent case in point, it wasn't that shocking to me when Power in Chainsaw Man was the inspiration for that was Cartman from South Park. But
I will refrain from
really?
doing a Cartman impression.
That's hilarious.
well, and it's also the reason why the most redundant phrase that any creator of a manga or an anime can say is that they took notes from Disney, is because that's been a thing since the days of Osamu Tezuka.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring that up is a lot of people, especially on this side of the globe, have this mindset of taking genres, subgenres, and the like, and putting these impenetrable walls between them.
Yep.
In other parts of the world, that's not really the case, and
Yeah.
that line has been blurring, with just the ease of communication and time. But a lot of people still have that wall set up. And I think, and when it comes to the whole magic versus technology thing, this is another form of it. Instead of trying to have specific walls against each other, taking a mishmash of elements and seeing what comes out of it.
Yeah, not this or that, this and that.
Mm-hmm. And I would say I honestly think that's the reason why when there was that whole new setting contest in the early 2000s, I think that's part of the reason why Eberron won that, because it was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
There is obviously from a game design perspective, it's easy to have that separation between the two for the purposes of mechanics, but I don't think it's the main way that it should be going about. And truth be told, the one time that the magic versus technology adversarial relationship made sense, oddly enough, is Arcanum. Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura.
Mm.
And nobody brings up the whole magic as the old ways, which is certainly the case. And I think an interesting counter argument to that is Tenra Bancho Zero, where you do have the old and new ways debate, but it's more about it's not exactly black and white affair. It's more about people integrating new technologies with magic rather than using what came before. Especially since a lot of the technological base was heavily controlled up until recently in that setting.
Another way to do it. Go ahead, sorry.
You actually just made me think of another book series that has the whole magic versus technology dichotomy, which is the Dark Sword trilogy, or technically more than that. And in that one, it does actually have a in-world reason why the two are at odds, because the one is literally the antithesis of the other, because of the person who started the whole technology was kind of a magic eater.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so again, if the crunch goes with the fluff, another, if it's a story element, whereas in maybe the entire world, at least I'm using Planet Mountain as an example, there is a people's who they have a dichotomy of rejection of technology because it goes with the story of their people.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to do with the world, though. The world uses magic and technology all the time together, but a specific element can have an issue with it.
Yeah. Also, since I've covered Sword World, I should point out that it did an interesting thing with one of the races. I believe it was the Grass Runner race, which kind of have some rabbit features, but they cannot use divine magic. And while it's not outright stated, it's heavily implied. It's because they're technically not from this world.
Oh, okay.
So they don't have the same connection to the gods that other races do.
Mm.
Of course, the whole sword world in that setting is actually literal. A lot of the things within it were created by what are known as the Swords of Genesis. There have been 3, and every time one of them shows up, big shit ends up happening. One of them created the humanoid races, one created the barbarous races, and both of them have been used in weapons against each other. The third one acted as a calming element and basically shattered itself to keep the other two from fighting all the time. But I know one. I do recall at one point having a debate about what side of the and nobody's saying if he could find a translation of Sword World. There's been a translation of Sword World 2.0 out for months. They're now working on They recently finished 2.5. Like this is something that's been this translation project has been around for quite a while.
Yeah, 2.5 came out in 2018.
Yeah, they've just recently started. They just recently finished translating the 3 core books for 2.5. Some of the people involved in it have also been doing work translating the Lodos novels.
And that's exactly how I got introduced to Sword World.
That's how I'd say that's how a lot of people get introduced, even though 2.0 isn't exactly using the same setting. A conversion guide has been translated, but a lot of the 1.0 stuff hasn't gotten the same amount of attention. And the funny thing about Sword World is when the Goblin Slayer TTRPG came out, a bunch of people were saying, "Why didn't they just use D&D for this? I mean, you have a character sheet in a D&D character sheet in the light novel. Sword World has a bigger footprint. Also, not in my personal opinion, it's a far more interesting game. But the interesting thing about Sword World's different forms of magic is all of them require some sort of catalyst.
Yeah, you've mentioned this before. This is an interesting idea. So some sort of battery type. What help me understand catalyst?
If a catalyst, the way to define catalyst in this regard is some sort of item that is needed in order to essentially channel the spell and channel the energy of a spell into an actual effect.
So the person is a magic user and they're using something. So I'll use the wand staff example, or they're not a magic user, but they have acquired something that then provides them this ability.
It's more the former than the latter.
Okay.
And in because of the way Sword World works out, the way that you'd end up learning magic is just taking a level in a class. Although, because of the way it's designed, multi-classing is far easier than you might think. In fact, you're almost expected to multi-class right out of the gate. But the big ones as far as magic are going to be artificers, who require a magisphere in order to use their spells. They still spend MP, but you need a magisphere as that catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
Conjurers use spiritualism magic, and a lot of their signature thing is animated dolls and golems, and they require a magic implement. Fairy tamers require, well, a fairy, or rather a gem that contains one. And if you're making Pokemon jokes with the fairy tamer, you're actually not that far off.
Actually, a better example would be the Clow cards from Card Captor Sakura.
But priests, well, you can pretty much figure that out, and they require a holy symbol. And sorcerers also require a magic implement, but they use what's known as true speech. And true speech is probably the closest thing to blaster caster you're gonna get. There are some outliers like the arcanist as well as warlocks. Warlocks are more of the deal with the devil, but instead of your deal giving you spells, it's hyper focused on summoning. It's just that the medium of the summon is yourself. But actually, the cloud card relationship is a good one to go about, since obviously the card's effect has to be captured first before it can be used. And I would say another example of this kind of thing is I know that Flutter had brought up Magi Ranger, but if I'm going to use a Tokusatsu example, there's and nobody's saying the screen is black. I'm not seeing that. I hope there isn't some 7-second delay shit going on. Let me...
No, seems to be fine for me.
No, but I think it...
Yeah, I even saw a successor leave and come back, so, yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
No worries. Unfortunately, I do have to go because I have a small furry animal telling me it's time for bed.
All right. Thanks for stopping by, Neff, and I hope to see you again the next time we do this.
Hey, no problem. I'd certainly love to come back.
Mm-hmm. Stay frosty, man.
But before I go, I will tell us one thing. Since we have discussed Sanderson, I will read his 3 laws of magic. First law. An author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic.
Okay.
Second law. Limitations are greater than power.
Mm-hmm.
And the third law. Expand on what you have already before you add something new.
that one I think should be drilled into people's heads, especially.
Right?
Yep, I agree. But I'll post a link to where I found those in
Yeah.
the council there, and bid you farewell.
Stay frosty, Neff.
Stay frosty.
Yeah.
When and actually that third one brings up an interesting point, because when we were doing the reconstruction of Ruby, one frustration I had with writers Miles Luna and Kerry Shawcross is that they, instead of developing the characters that they had, they were constantly adding new characters.
Mm.
And I've seen the same kind of thing with bad world builders, where they constantly add new
Yes.
new lore to their world without thinking about how to integrate it with what they have.
And really, I think that ends up speaking to what they've built already. If you can't tell more, get more in depth about what you've said already, then what you've said already is already weak.
Yeah, now I will note that I do consider consider things like stands in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure to be a form of soft magic. But even with that, there are one would think that it's a bit of an ass pull, but there are certain patterns that stands end up following. One of them is the grading system that stands have, which does have its effects, especially when it comes to things like range and evolution. But there's also the fact that every single power that stands have always have their catches. Like let's use one of the biggest memes in this regard, Zeraldo. You would think that being able to stop time would result in just complete overpoweredness, which, to be fair, it is a powerful stand, but there is still a catch with that ability. The time stop can only last, I think it was 6 seconds.
Mm. Again, limitation.
Mm-hmm. And some might argue that the end of it with Jotaro being able to move in that time stop is an ass pull. But if you go back and look at that fight, originally he could only move a little bit in the stopped time, and as it goes on, he's able to move more and more before he's able to just move freely within it. And
the idea of progression.
Yeah. And before that you had the concept of Ripple/Sendo, which could be interpreted as ki, but it had its limitations within it. One of them being needing to be able to breathe, and that energy can't escape the body. Which is why a lot of the uses of it involve physical contact. I think the reason why Araki ended up venturing away from that concept for a while, at least, was it feeling too much like Fist of the North Star. I think is what he said. I think there's also the fact he felt that he had done all he could with it after battle tendency. Another, but but if we're talking about magic systems and weeb shit, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Full Metal Alchemist, which might appear as a soft magic system, but I'd actually say it leans more towards hard, because there are very strict rules with how it works.
Mm.
And even if there's ways to bend the rules, those come with consequences.
Limitations.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like the biggest limitation is, of course, needing to have to draw transmutation circles on around and around what you're gonna be using the effect on. It has to involve physical matter in some form. And there's the fact that the circle is going to be specific to what you're doing. And yeah, grant the sole reason that Ed doesn't use transmutation circles in that series is he's making the circle internally. And when it comes to these strict rules, and I should note, I don't expect a hard magic system to explain everything about it, but give a baseline that people can follow. If your magic is based around every individual person having a specific element that they utilize, don't have them using other elements unless you give a damn good explanation as to how they can do it.
Yeah, it's as simple as explain yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to bring this full circle to that phrase that's become a meme. It's magic. I don't have to explain it. I honestly think any writer who uses that line is not doing their job.
No.
Someone who did a really good job of explaining their magic system has to be Naruto with its use of chakra. The way they broke it down and how they used it felt so believable within the universe created.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly see that, especially with the categorizations, and even more so when you compare it to its contemporaries. Like, Bleach has several magic systems, but aside from the naming conventions, didn't do a good job at exploring why all the spells are numbered like that. For instance, One Piece didn't introduce a quote unquote magic system until Haki showed up several hundred chapters into the story.
Hey.
And as far as nobody says that they spend too long explaining how it works. I don't really know if that's the case. They spent a couple episodes worth explaining how it works, then a couple more when releases became a thing. That's about it. At least from what I recall. It's not like they spent time explaining it every single episode. Maybe explaining certain spells, but that's not applicable to what we're talking about. And obviously with something like DBZ, it's technically key, but what can be done with it was all over the place in both Dragon Ball and in DBZ. So it's a case of chakra is the worst explained system except for all the other ones. Okay, that's a bit extreme, but I think you see where I'm going with that. And I know some folk really don't like having to explain that kind of thing and see it as unnecessary exposition. I think at its worst, that kind of exposition is a necessary evil. Especially when you have a lot of moving parts to account for.
And exposition it only becomes bad if you're a bad or bad. I'm not bad or wrong, but it only becomes poor if you're a poor storyteller. Exposition can be grand if it's told, if it's a great way of telling it.
Nope. Nobody's saying all shonen magic is kind of bullshit. All magic is kind of bullshit. Let's not single anybody out. Especially when there's no reason to do any singling out. I know that shonen battle manga can be an easy whipping boy, but that's not the MO around here.
If I'm going to call anybody out for magic or anything else, is in anything recent, is the Willow series. It was on all levels.
Its magic system is the least of its problems.
Correct.
I remember Douglas doing a thing where he took a photo from Witcher Blood Origin, Willow, Rings of Power, and said these are all separate series. And I think the point that he was getting at with it is how all three of them did not have a strong identity comparatively to each other.
Yeah. Yep.
Nobody is saying manga authors need to learn what appendixes are. It's kind of hard to do appendixes when you're publishing your work in a collective magazine every month or every week. Where are you gonna put a appendix in an issue of Weekly Shonen Jump?
Yeah, that doesn't work.
It'd be like demanding 2000 AD to have an appendix. The volumes that we get are just collected versions of those stories as they were put up in the weekly magazine. Same thing with something like Judge Dredd's relationship with 2000 AD. Or any number of stories in relation to heavy metal. It's the same. It's the same principle. I do remember postscript stuff being put in some of the manga that Del Rey was publishing, but that's a whole other story. And what I find, even with that, I don't think a appendix is outright necessary in a story unless your story actually calls for it. And it's something that you're not going to be able to get away with in weekly issues. It's something that is better served in novels.
And especially an appendix, not as your explanation for your magic system. No.
At most that kind of thing should be put in its own kind of world of art book, and that specifically for people who are hardcore fans of that story.
Yeah.
I think there was a side book in that regard with Game of Thrones, although I would caution in using that as a way to explain your own plot holes. Which is kind of like the whenever I've criticized a bad movie and someone says, it makes sense in the book. I'm not reading the book. I'm watching it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh gosh.
I only see that when it comes to stands of really bad works. But I'd say overall the core thing to take away from this whole affair when it comes to the exploration of magic systems is the fact that that whatever you're doing, you have to make sure that you are absolutely consistent with it, and that it fits what you're trying to do.
Uh-huh.
if you're trying to do a exploration of science, don't include magic potions in your shit. If you want to be pulp, then fucking commit. If you want to be semi-realism, fucking commit. As the saying goes, commit to the bit. But I think with that we've thoroughly covered this particular matter. We'll be back next week with another crazy ass entry in the GeekWatch, and all throughout this week I'm going to be a busy monk because I'll be delving into the interview train once again, including
Yay!
with Tuesday with including a few returning faces. This Friday will be the continued exploration of the beta version of Convictor Drive. We'll be covering the strength type Convictor in this week's Valley of the Judged. And next Sunday, of course, will be a new episode of Valley of the Judged. I know some people are expecting a reconstruction soon. I'm not sure how long it's going to take before I'm in the mindset for doing that because of the sheer amount of work that we had to do with the Ruby reconstruction. And there's a document that's like 27 pages long that we ended up writing, just trying to fill in holes. But that is a story for another day. So until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.